Why do some people find difficult games exhilarating and rewarding, while others find them frustrating or repelling? And how can it be that one game did both for me within a single hour of gameplay? Well, let's find out. The year is 2025, and the long-awaited sequel to Team Cherry's hit debut game, Hollow Knight, has finally released after a long and mostly silent 8-year wait. I started playing the game the day after release and have been hooked on it for a month since then. 2 days ago, I finally finished the true ending of the game and reached 100% completion on my file with around 60 hours of gameplay. At the end, I sat in awe at how incredible of an experience the game had given me, but also taken aback that some of the most frustrating moments I had ever experienced in gaming came from that same source. I find myself wondering how the same developers who created the Cogwork Dancers, the Citadel's intricate level design, and the surprisingly readable story also made Gruld the Great, and somehow didn't include a single accessibility option. In this essay, I will be talking about each of these strengths and flaws for a moment, and then summing up my thoughts on the game in the conclusion. I was actually quite surprised when I finished Silksong, defeated Lost Lace, and truly understood, or at least felt like I did, much of what had happened in the game, from a narrative lens. I knew that Lace was the beloved daughter of Grandmother Silk, and that the third act was about that lingering love. I knew that the land of Farloom had fallen to decay after the Four Hearts had succumbed to age and the new rule. I even understood Hornet's character arc of learning to love the people of the land and act selflessly. This came in stark contrast when I first finished Hollow Knight in 2018. I will open by admitting that at the time I had very little experience with the cryptic storytelling of Souls-like games. However, I've replayed Hollow Knight more recently, and it still feels nearly as cryptic as it did that first time. More Dark Souls 1 than Sekiro. A story that feels like you need 200 IQ or 30 hours of YouTube analysis to grasp fully, versus one that most players can understand the core elements of, with some hidden details to be parsed by the analysts for devoted fans. I consider this a huge win. I can't imagine it was unintentional on Team Cherry's part. It doesn't lose anything when it comes to the positive word of mouth of YouTube essayists, but it does gain them more fans who will even start down the rabbit hole because they have a launching board. I think the core example of this more digestible story I found during my gameplay came partially thanks to Christopher Larkin nailing yet another soundtrack. I'm no music theorist, but even I can hear the obvious motifs present in the music of the Citadel, Grandmother Silk, and Lace. Those plus the fantastic and sparing use of cutscenes and actual dialogue in this game really helped me to understand what was happening. In particular, Lace's line, "Life? You're too generous. This weak, wasting existence." This was not life, just a husk shaped to act as a child. Really helped me to understand her character, her trauma. Then, later, Hornet speaks of Grandmother Silk holding on to life to protect her child, and this is further shown when she gives her power to Hornet at the very end in order to help her and Lace escape. It truly gave a vibe that I can't imagine many players missed or misunderstood. Section 2. I honestly have never cared much for the discussion around difficulty in games, Souls-likes, and should there be an easy mode. That may be my privilege talking because I was always just skilled enough to beat the games I was interested in, using the tools provided to me. Almost always before it became frustrating, and always before I threw in the towel. This was true of Hollow Knight for me. I gave up on Nightmare King Grim, but thankfully that was optional content. And I took many tries to defeat the Radiance, but eventually overcame her. Silksong gave me massive trouble on this front. Lost Lace took me maybe 50 plus tries, and most of the last 10 of those 60 hours of gameplay. Around my 20th attempt, deep into the second session, I still hadn't reached Phase 2 even once. I was close to giving up. At the time, I wished the game had at least the accessibility options of a modern FromSoft game where I could switch from my fun build, Reaper Crest and minimal tool use, to something cheesy suggested on Reddit that would allow me to overcome the wall preventing me from seeing the end of the game. A little bit out of my difficulty window, you might say. I did try this, but Silksong is designed to brick wall hard enough even that the cheesiest builds will still need to be able to get through Lost Lace's first 2 phases, mostly unscathed. I did end up doubling down and overcoming the wall, but I was close to my limit. Even a small bump in difficulty further would have made me give up. Obviously, it's fine if some folks give up, It's fine if some games are not for everyone, but I have learned through my years of life that not everyone has the same skill level, the same desires, or even the same physical ability. I know you can imagine someone out there who has a physical or mental disability, but just like me, and probably like you, enjoys challenging themselves in games. They probably, like us, enjoy games which allow them to be seriously challenged, to learn from their mistakes, and to see the full game through, to witness the narrative payoff. It would not have been a difficult thing for Team Cherry to implement a feature similar to the assist mode in Celeste, allowing every player who wants it to see the end of their capabilities and to see the end of the story. And to be expressly clear here, I am not just talking about people with disabilities, but anyone with a gaming skill level less than the one necessary to beat a game like this, which we all know is quite a high bar. I know Cherry is a small team, but anyone who knows anything about coding can probably come up with 5 possible, extremely simple solutions that would have taken less than a day of work. I don't even need to say anything, and those ideas are already likely flooding your mind if that's you. The one that comes easiest to me is a simple assist toggle in the menu that turns on character invincibility to enemy damage until toggled off. Writing a few sentences like the Celeste developers explaining how this is not the intended way to play the game would be incredibly solid. If they were even willing to put in a little extra effort, they might have it prompt the user automatically if the game senses maybe 50 respawns at the same bench. Anyways, I hope you can agree with me that players of many different skill windows deserve to have a chance to experience this game if they want to, just like I did and just like you probably did, especially when it requires so little work to give them that chance. Section 3. Back to gushing for this part, and most importantly, back to praising the soundtrack. I don't want to go into too much detail here because I believe the world is really something that speaks for itself, so instead, I will just highlight 3 moments that gave me joy. The first was the very beginning of Act 2 of the game. I'm sure many others have already talked about it, but that just proves the efficacy of the thing. The quite brutal, but not too long run back to a moderately challenging boss in The Last Judge is likely to make you lose all your rosaries. Or, like me, you might save and quit so you regain them on your 3rd try, and then go spend them in Bellheart so you don't have to worry about losing that currency. Then, either way, if you lost them or if you spent them, when you finally defeat the Last Judge, you go to the Citadel elevator with no currency, and then when the elevator breaks, plunging Hornet into the underworks, this leads to one of the best designed storytelling moments in all of gaming. In one of the first rooms you stumble into, you've been desperately looking for a bench because you still have maybe 2 or 3 masks of health left after the boss fight, and the tough new enemies and hazards have continued to annoy you. In that room, finally, a rosary outlet for a bench, when you realize you don't have any, and that the enemies in this area have been dropping a paltry 2 or 3 rosaries each. When you finally do get enough for the bench, and go back, sit on it, only to witness it flip back over, making you pay again after you get up, you realize what the underworks is. You realize this is an industrial hellscape, where the workers are mistreated and abused, sapped of every drop of their resources and hope. Talking with Loam and witnessing the other bugs, you can see that the Citadel isn't all it's cracked up to be. The second moment comes a little earlier, when at some point in Hornet's journey, you may come across a jailer bug with a big cage. You may try to fight them, and you likely will be captured. When Hornet awakes, she is trapped in a strange room on the wrong side of the map, and she has none of her tools, including her cloak and needle. Exploring this lab will quickly become an amazing escape mission as you seek to regain Hornet's power and tools, finding keys and getting revenge on the jailers that have taken her here. It is like the wonderful power fantasy of regaining your powers at the beginning of Metroid games, but having had more time to enjoy your tools before having them stripped, it feels incredibly stark here. The third and final of those moments comes at the end of Act 2, and it is just everything Christopher Larkin brought to this game. The music throughout the Citadel is so poignant. It always captures exactly what each zone should feel like, from the peace and safety of Songclave to the cogs and robotics of the Cogwork Core, the majesty of the conductors in the high halls. This culminates in a fantastic crescendo of music as you climb to the cradle to fight Lace again, and finally challenge Grandmother Silk for dominance of the kingdom. Larkin's score truly makes you feel calm, anxious, invigorated, triumphant, and utterly defeated, each when it is appropriate for the story. Section 4. This is the part I came here to write about, although I found many other things I wanted to say along the way. I'm going to start with some praise. go into the dark depths, and then finish with what I consider to be some of the best combat I've ever experienced in gaming. I want to start off by talking about the enemy arenas in Silksong. I have seen many people malign these online, and I'm fully aware that it is another difficulty scope question. I can see that they may be simply too challenging for some players, and that could be fixed, as we discussed, with simple difficulty modifiers. However, when many of these enemy gauntlets are at just the right level of difficulty for a player, they can be simple magic. For example, the Coral Tower was tremendously enjoyable for me. I felt like I was right on the edge throughout, dying maybe 1 or 2 times, and always finishing with only a handful of masks left on each gauntlet. The other ones placed throughout the world were also very enjoyable. I think Team Cherry's choice of enemies in these arenas generally felt very intentional and balanced, with unfair moments arriving extremely infrequently. They gave the best of these to the Colosseum of Fools from the first game, but in smaller doses throughout the whole journey, this was something I greatly enjoyed, and I think everyone would as well if it were calibrated to their skill level. There were also a number of bosses that were great. They were on the level of some of the most notable bosses from the first game. I would highlight the 4th Chorus, the Last Judge, both Trobio fights, the Bell Eater, Widow, and Phantom here. There are more, but these are the primary examples that come to mind for me as really quality encounters. By contrast, we have one absolute low moment in the design of this game. There were a few bosses or enemy encounters that I didn't care for or felt were mediocre, like Savage Beastfly, Watcher at the Edge, Plasmified Zango, but those can easily be ignored as they did not create any meaningful roadblock or could just be skipped. Additionally, some might say that they dislike bosses that are too easy, and I just can't agree with that, to be honest. Sure, if more than half the fights in the game went down like a house of cards, that would be annoying, but that's far from reality here. The sin I simply can't forgive is Grohl the Great. I understand the desire to create a small, frustrating experience for the player. It can be enjoyable when done with restraint. I think of Dark Souls 1 Blighttown for a good example of this done well, although I'm sure some will disagree with that. Vile Water is just multiple steps too far. Let's first address how well hidden the midway bench is on Grohl's run back. I play these types of exploration-based games with minimal internet intervention. I've always said that the best way to play a game is with a good friend sitting beside you who has played it before, someone who can give you a small and appropriate hint when it makes sense. If I were in that position with a friend playing this, I wouldn't even hesitate to tell them that they missed something important in the hidden path room, and insist that they stay until it is found, because attempting to fight Grohl from the Bellway bench would be the most mind-numbing experience I can imagine. Next, even if you have the halfway bench, the run back to the actual boss arena is ridiculous. Even when I had done 20-some attempts, I would still consistently go into the arena with low silk and some damage because of the dart thrower enemies and the rest of the run back. If you are trying to go fast, and you better hope you're going fast, because if you're going slow, this is going to take your entire life. Then, in the arena, you'll meet a bunch of waves of enemies, including multiple more of the same dart throwers. These enemies are certainly possible to defeat without taking damage, but not quickly, and certainly not for the average or below skilled player. Finally, by the time Grohl emerges into the arena, you've undergone minutes of tedium, and on this, your 10th try tonight, you're at a breaking point. If you have to do this stupid run back, the arena, and the entire surprisingly long boss fight one more time, you'll give up. This kind of frustration snowballs. Maybe you beat him in 10 or 15 tries and stay calm, but after 8 minutes of tedious run backs, your patience and focus are gone. I can't believe that I haven't even mentioned how getting poisoned nearly every time by the toxic water makes this even worse. I've had gameplay experiences before where, as they say, I've finished something and felt relief instead of accomplishment. I know what that feels like. This wasn't that. When I finally cheesed out Grohl on my 30th attempt or so, I felt no accomplishment or relief. I felt something simpler. Anger at the developers for putting me through that pile of shit, wasting hours of my life. Ironically, it made the Grohl boss fight even worse for me that I fought him only about an hour after I fought the Cogwork Dancers, which were one of the best designed combat encounters in all of gaming I've experienced. I love the Mantis Lords in Hollow Knight. I still hold them up as a pinnacle of the boss encounter. The sheer dance of the fight was nearly unrivaled until Silksong's release. This game has not one, not two, but 6 unique fights that gave me the same dance vibes as the Mantis Lords. Full 3 lace fights. Grandmother Silk, the Cogwork and Viridian Dancers, Four Brothers, Cygnus and Braun, the Last Sinner, and last but not least, Scarsinger Carmelita. I will give a little detail on each to show how truly great I think they are. First, the 3 lace fights are a perfect progression on each other, giving the player a real sense of their own improvement. They are also perfectly paced, even though the final boss was a bit too hard for me. The way she gains new moves, more damage, and becomes faster with each encounter just matches the pacing of the game in such a magnificent way. Additionally, they add great characterization to the most important character in the game other than Hornet. Grandmother Silk is a really interesting fight. It's obviously modeled after the Radiance, but it seems most people, including myself, found her much easier than her Hollow Knight counterpart. Part of this is Hornet being faster and easier to control than the Knight, and part of this is that she's more accessible in the arena, so you can easily get more offense on her. Regardless, this fight makes you feel like a badass, especially if you struggle with the Radiance. It has attacks covering the screen and seems very complicated, but is quite manageable in reality for most players. Defeating her just makes you feel cool. The epic music and the cutscenes all do their fair share in creating this feeling as well. The 2 Dancers fights are the most obvious comparison to the Mantis Lords for good reason. A duo fight against identical enemies with a twist. If you didn't love when the Cogwork Dancers hit their 3rd phase and one moved the offbeat, I don't even know if we played the same game. The final phase with the single sad dancers, even perfectly tragic, contribute to their story of the Green Prince and the Viridian Dancers later on in the game. Cygnus and Braun is another great duo fight that felt like a dance, but with 2 different movesets this time. That may be even more difficult to achieve. It just felt incredible to dance on, and weave between their attacks in that epic arena with the lava flows on both sides and in the center. The Last Sinner is another fantastic boss that tells an important part of the story of Fairloon, but I'm here to talk about the feel and the mechanics. She is yet another lovely dance, and that is that perfect progression on the Widow fight from earlier in the game, fully taking advantage of Hornet's now complete movement set. The second phase of this fight is perfectly orderly, and when you get in the zone, it just achieves flow. In my opinion, the best of all the bosses in the game is Carmelita. All these dance fights are so good because of the player's ability to achieve pure flow state when they have learned the enemy's patterns, and are giving the game their full attention. I believe Carmelita does this even better because she has absolutely no pauses in her attack pattern. If you want to get any hits in, you need Dancer Mode. There is no other choice, not to mention her beautiful singing the whole time to keep the pace of the fight. All of these bosses allow attuned players to lock in and enjoy the pace and rhythm of the game like almost no game ever has before. What is Silksong? Is it a masterpiece, or are the failings too much of a factor? I don't really have an answer to that, but I'm sure you do. I'm just here to break it down and talk about the things I love and hate. Maybe a masterpiece isn't about perfection. Maybe it's about how deeply it makes us feel both joy and frustration. I can say I can certainly recommend this game to anyone who enjoyed Hollow Knight, and would recommend both to anyone who enjoys a challenge in a game. Okay, here's an outro. To anyone who watched, thank you. This is my first video essay I'm publishing here on YouTube, and I hope somebody gets some enjoyment out of this. Just kind of wanted to share my thoughts, even though 1,000 other people already have on this game. I will be making more videos similar to this soon, so if you're here before that happens, come back and check those out. Thanks.